Hey everyone, Dylan Welch here. Thank you for tuning into the Intelligence Report. Our goal is to bring you interesting people around the world, as well as a neutral geopolitical analysis on what's happening. Please subscribe to the podcast. Visit us for more long-form articles at www.intelligencereport.org and follow us along on social media for short-form daily content. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Intelligence Report. I am your host, Dylan Welch. I am very excited to talk to our guest today, a little bit about our guest, Callie Veelenturf. As you know, I really like to bring on people who are doing a lot of different interesting things. They don't just pigeonhole themselves into one topic. They have a diverse background. They're interesting people. And a lot of times I meet these people in really interesting places. So, of course, Callie, a close friend of mine, falls into all of these categories. I will let Callie give a little bit of a deeper background into what she does, but just a kind of a fun story. Callie and I met each other in Panama. We were both attending a conference and we sat next to each other at the same table. We're chatting it up a little bit, and in walks this really important government person, and everyone is trying to get this person's attention in the entire room. And he looks over, he sees Callie, he beelines it to Callie and shakes her hand and gives her a hug. And I was like, all right, if this is my introduction to Callie, then one, clearly she's doing something right. Clearly she's a really amazing person. So without further ado, Callie, thank you so much for joining us here today. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, Dylan, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's an honor to be here and to have the opportunity to just chat about some impactful work going on. That story of how we met makes me smile because I remember that day so clearly, and it was just so exciting to be put next to each other kind of spontaneously and have the opportunity to chat over the course of the day and see you speak as well. You're an incredible speaker on stage, so thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I'll give a very high level background, but we'll dive into this a little bit more. So, you are the founder of Rights for Nature. You are an explorer with National Geographic. You're a scientist with Harmony with Nature with the UN. You're also in the process of getting your PhD. You've lived all over the world. You have a really strong passion for nature, for the environment. You're a marine conservation biologist. So there's so much that you have to share with our audience. I'm really excited, but let's pick one to kind of focus on for now. So let's start off with being a National Geographic Explorer. Tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of came about.
Sure. So the National Geographic Society is this entity that, I've admired my whole life. I grew up with the National Geographic magazines on my coffee table as a kid at my grandparents' house. And, I also learned about Jane Goodall at a pretty young age as well, and her story, and like learning to understand more about the division between animals and humans and how that division is actually quite small and inspiring the world to protect nature, and her journey with National Geographic. So I had always kind of aspired to be part of that community at some point. And then basically to become a National Geographic Explorer, all you have to do is pitch something highly impactful to do something new and innovative and exploratory in the world. And then if National Geographic decides to fund you, you become an explorer. So what I pitched to them in 2018 was a pilot study in the Pearl Islands archipelago in the Gulf of Panama. It's this 240 island archipelago. And to my knowledge, there had been no sea turtle research done there. And just looking at the archipelago and looking at some papers that had shown some foraging behavior near the archipelago from other sea turtle species, I thought there has to be sea turtles here. And I reached out to local community members and I asked around, and they were like, yeah, there's all kinds of sea turtle species here. Please come study them and work with us. And so that was basically my pitch to National Geographic, was to kind of work with the communities and share with the world this important nesting and foraging habitat for sea turtles and what we could do to better protect it.
Well, you make it sound easy, but that is no easy task to become an explorer with National Geographic. And that is so interesting and cool that you were able to, kind of identify this problem and then, go out and make it happen. But also in a way that brings, the community together at the same time. I think that's really admirable. What are some of your biggest takeaways from that experience? I mean, I know it's still happening, but we met in Panama. I know you're kind of actively working on it. What are some cool things that you learned that you could share with us along the way?
Sure. Well, in the Pearl Islands, there are four different sea turtle species that have nests historically, including the critically endangered East Pacific leatherback sea turtle, the largest sea turtle in the world that can weigh up to 2,000 pounds, and the critically endangered hawksbill sea turtle. But through my work so far, I haven't been able to confirm any more recent sightings in the last 6 years because of their critically endangered status and, slow disappearance from the region. But there are two sea turtle species that nest consistently there, the olive ridley sea turtle and the green sea turtle. And in working with the communities, I learned a lot about how we can actually generate change and how we need to bridge those divides between local communities and scientists and government agencies and really work together to come up with creative solutions. For example, one of the families that I stayed with in the community, she became, a great friend of mine, this mother, and she told me that she walks the beaches and, makes sure that the turtles aren't harvested themselves, but she does harvest the eggs, but she only harvests half. And she wants to leave half to make sure that the species can reproduce. And even though her actions are illegal, you can see that understanding of protecting the mother and protecting at least half of her clutch. And she knows other people in the community maybe would have harvested the turtle and the entire clutch. So it helps you really rethink and kind of like realign these like standardized decision-making processes about right and wrong and like who's the villain and who is the protector really. And so I've been really working with communities as leaders in conservation, um, and trying to get them the resources that they may need to fulfill their own conservation dreams, which I would say is a different approach than a lot of other conservationists or scientists may take. That community-led approach and just seeing myself more as a bridge to fill any gap that they might need in achieving goals that they have but have never had the resources or time of day from government agencies to kind of fulfill those goals.
That's interesting. So you're saying that, part of like a local woman's business or life or way to feed herself involves cultivating these eggs. Does she use them for to eat or does she use them to like
Yeah.
she eats them? Okay. And then how does that make you feel? Because on one end, like local people have to eat and they, for as long as humans have been around, they eat other animals and that's part of nature. But on the other end, it's like, well, we want to be, careful to protect these animals. So how does like, where does that balance come into play? Like, are you looking at it as more like, well, this is, a potentially endangered species. Why don't we find you food from other areas? Or is it like, well, this is also your culture and what you've done for, as long as you and your ancestors have lived here? Like, what does that balance look like? How do you kind of figure out what that is?
It's definitely a challenge, and I would say that finding that balance isn't something I feel like it's even for me to decide. I think it's almost a process of teasing apart all of the different components of it and really looking at the picture holistically. Because, for example, this woman, she may harvest half of a nest of sea turtle eggs, but her climate impact is, tiny. Whereas someone like me, for myself, for example, I have never consumed a sea turtle egg, but I took, I don't know how many flights last year. Right? And climate change and the impact on sea level rise and the way that sea turtle nesting beaches are being eroded entirely. Like a lot of my actions, or I would say a lot of the people that have never consumed a sea turtle egg's actions, could be feeding a lot of that loss of sea turtle nesting habitat as a whole, right? Which, really equates to the loss of entire nests over the last several decades. So I think it's a complicated issue, and I would say that in Panama, it represents almost a need for a more holistic and creative approach, in particular with this like illegal harvest activity, because these are marginalized communities that, live 4 hours in a boat from Panama City. And so I think like having more access to other food resources and support systems would really help them potentially have that like longevity to not need to depend on some of this wildlife populations, which at the time is, the only protein source available to them. So I think that it's been a really exciting journey, and I feel honored to have been let in to some of these issues that are happening, and have the trust to know that the communities know that I'm not necessarily judging at any given point. I'm really just there to be a sponge and learn from them, and they learn from me as well. So it's a really beautiful exchange, and I would say that my mind was broadened a lot just through spending all of those months with the communities, because you can learn so much more about like nature and our relationship with nature than you can from the books in school sometimes.
I love that. That is an amazing answer, and thank you. And that's honestly the whole point of this podcast is, someone might hear a soundbite and say and hear, oh, like local woman eating endangered turtle eggs. And you're 100% correct. Like that is such a small, minuscule impact on the big picture problem. So thank you for reminding us of that. It's easy
Of
to focus
course,
on
yeah.
the little things. And even I was just like, what? She's eating the eggs? But yeah, you're right. There's way bigger, issues at play in terms of like food scarcity or why, these animals are threatened in the first place. And that's not that doesn't fall on one individual woman trying to feed herself and her family. So thank you for reframing that. That's really important, and that's why I love having these conversations. And something that you brought up in terms of support from governments and political figures. This is really interesting, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into this. And just for a little bit of context to our listeners, Callie and I were talking before we started, and we're like, what should we talk about? Because there's so much. And so we're not going to dive too deep into one subject because I want to have Callie on in the future and we can chat further. Like, even just, the work you're doing with Nat Geo is one thing. But I really want to touch on the work you're doing with Rights for Nature. And I think, we're not going to hit everything, but I want to at least share and learn more about that big picture, high level work that you're doing. So can you share a little bit about the work that you've been doing with Rights for Nature? You're the founder, you're the brainchild. I know you're doing a lot, where you're working with a lot of amazing people. So yeah, tell us a little bit more.
This is my favorite topic in the whole world, the rights of nature. So when I first started thinking about this in like 2019, I hadn't even heard of it, and no one around me had heard of it. And basically, I don't know if I told you this, but I came to the concept of the rights of nature through a process in defending my own rights in the United States. And I had tried to protect myself through, any normal means of protection. And it was only when I realized that I had rights that had been violated and that I could really learn what those rights were, seek legal counsel and defend them and protect myself that, I realized how important rights-based protections are. And in the process of healing from that experience and trying to move on in a positive way, I thought, how can I take this problem solving framework, if you will, or pathway and apply it to my work as a conservationist? And I really quickly realized that we can't recognize and defend the rights of nature in the way that I had just defended my own, because the rights of nature aren't recognized within a majority of legal systems around the world. And that lit a major fire within me. It was a major light bulb moment for me when I realized, of course, we're seeing the environmental degradation and destruction around the world, the different environmental crises that we're seeing, the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, because, nature's basic right to exist, persist, regenerate, be healthy and thriving aren't recognized. And so, how can we defend them? How can we make sure that nature has that voice at the table where decisions are being made, that her needs are recognized adequately? And I typed rights of nature into Google because I didn't know if it was even a thing. And I quickly learned that the rights of nature had been passed already on a national level in Ecuador in 2008 in a constitutional amendment, and in Bolivia in 2010 in a national law. And I thought, wow, how how amazing. And when I was working in Panama with the sea turtles and seeing a lot of the ways locally, but also globally, that nature hadn't necessarily been protected adequately, I decided to pitch to Panama's First Lady and a Congressman, Juan Diego Vasquez, this concept of a new national rights of nature law in Panama. And, to my surprise, they were extremely excited about the idea. And the novelty of it and its potential for impact. And we spent the next 2 years during the pandemic, 2020, 2021, 2022, drafting, debating, and revising the law together with the Earth Law Center and the Panamanian Parliament and the public, different Indigenous groups. And then on February 24th, 2022, the president of Panama signed the law into effect. So now Panama became the third country in the world to pass a national level rights of all nature law. And it's already been implemented 5 times in the last few years since then. And it just gives me so much hope for the future because, right now, nature is considered a resource to be exploited. And within the rights of nature framework, we really truly believe that nature has the right not to be exploited. And so it's kind of a framework shift and a mindset shift from like an anthropocentric or human-centered mindset to an ecocentric mindset. But when we say eco, we're including humans as part of that eco, because humans are part of the ecosystems that sustain all life on Earth. And it's time that those ecosystems had their rights recognized.
Well, first off, thank you for your work here. I mean, that is so incredible to essentially conceptualize and come up with an idea and get it all the way up to the point where the president had signed it into action is, one of the most ambitious goals that I've had the chance to, have someone on the podcast talk about and actually go out and make happen. So that is super cool. First off, congratulations on that. And I know like you're just right at the beginning of getting this rolling out, but I think at the core of it, who wouldn't really want, nature to have rights, right? Like it's such an interesting topic because, on one end, we live in a very capitalistic world where it's, how can we take something and make something and sell it for a profit, right? Like that's just a part of the world we live in. It's so ingrained into our society that that's not really going to go anywhere. But at the same time, at the expense of so much of our nature and our planet and our world, that it's, it gets to a point where it's like, okay, when are we going to put our foot down and say we have to come up with some sort of solution until, we just don't destroy this entire planet? And it seems like kind of a common sense thing. But then what you're doing is you're bringing in international law, geopolitics, governments, huge international corporations. Like it's such a crazy, mind-blowing concept to think about. And yet at the same time, it should be such a simple solution. Um, so thank you
I
for like being the person that's, taking those initiatives to make it happen and implement it, and roll it out worldwide. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Feel free to chime in, but I'm just curious, like now that it's, just in its early phases, what are your kind of goals and where do you see this, growing into the next 5, 10, 15 years?
So I think my dream and the dream of so many people in the rights of nature movement is that rights of nature can be passed nationally in as many countries as possible, as quickly as possible, and then not just passed nationally, but also implemented. So have these countries really look at, what does it mean to respect the rights of nature within their, national borders. And so I think one pathway that a lot of us see to getting there is through a United Nations Universal Declaration of the Rights of Nature. Just like, after World War II in 1948, there was this successful initiative and push to pass the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And it really set a global standard for how we expect all humans to be treated. And that was also a period in history when we were at a bit of a crossroads. Like we had to make a decision about, what standards we will hold for ourselves and what places we never wanted to go again. And I think that we're at another such crossroads now where we need to make a decision about like how much is enough and how can we really change the way that we respect and value nature going forward so that we are able to respect the ecosystems that sustain us in a way that allow them to continue doing that into the future. So I think that's kind of a dream that a lot of us have. And I would say it's like one of my biggest life goals is to like play whatever part I need to play in helping to see that come to fruition, see it come to pass. And, I'm currently in communications with Panama. I've asked if they would be willing to lead such a mission and get other countries around the world to join them. And we're currently waiting to see what they say on that. But I think that if we were able to do that and have a moment like this at the UN where the countries come together and vote to recognize the rights of nature, it would inspire them to bring that message home and try and align with it on a national level as well. So I think it would unite the world behind the concept in a way we haven't seen.
What I truly admire about you, Callie, is the fact that you're not only, in Panama, literally boots on the ground, helping sea turtles and, building communities. You're also at this huge international global level of thinking. And I think that's really cool that you're able to both, go out there and see it and experience it and get your hands dirty, but then applying it to how can this be scaled up to, a global, effect. I just think that's really cool. And I love people who are able to do both of those things because I think that's so important when real life change happens is, sometimes you have people who are just, there on the ground and that's amazing. Like obviously, we need people doing that, but then sometimes they're not able to communicate their message with, the bigger sort of systems at play or vice versa. There's people passing laws who have no idea what's actually happening on the ground. And I think there's very few people who are able to navigate both of those spaces. And that's why I've always thought, what you're doing is very admirable. So I want to put that out there. I'll wrap this up with one final question for you. What has been the biggest challenge rolling out the rights for nature? Is it the bureaucracy of governments? Is it the scaling? Is it the implementation? Is it the financing? Like, what are you kind of seeing slowing things down a little bit so that our audience can hopefully get behind you and give you a little push to move whatever that happens to be a little bit further down the road?
Thanks for that question. I think that I get this question a lot, and it's a hard one to answer, I would say, because in the process for the national level law in Panama, everyone that came to the public debate to talk about the different articles of the law, all of the criticism was about how it needed to be stronger. People wanted, stronger language in the different articles. And so for me, that was such a surprise because we were expecting major corporations to come out or, I know, industrial fishers to really try and get the law to not even go to the private debates with the parliamentarians. And so I would say a lot of people have surprisingly had the reaction that you had in the call where you were just like, this seems kind of obvious. Of course nature should have rights. And I think that's the reaction I get a lot from children as well. They can't believe that nature doesn't have rights recognized right now. But I think one of the obstacles that I'm facing with like larger institutions and governments is that worry about being the first. I heard from one of these entities that I'm communicating with that, when you're at the top of a mountain, it can be kind of lonely.
Mhm.
And so I think there is this sense that, a government may not know if they step out and support rights of nature so publicly at a UN level, will they receive backing from the world or will they be left to be viewed as extremists or radicals? And so I think something that everybody can maybe do is begin creating a wave of information about the rights of nature. If this is the first time you're hearing about it, try and share it with someone else that you know. Next time you see a post on Instagram about the rights of nature, share it so everybody that follows you can see it too. I think if we all work together to make this concept seem less radical, then countries will feel less afraid to take that step forward and work to recognize rights of nature on a national and on an international level.
Well, Callie, thank you for joining me today on the show. I'm super excited to stay in touch with you and to chat with you. Really quick, how can, what is kind of the best way our audience to can support you, follow you, learn more information?
So I try and share a decent amount on Instagram, I would say, with just my name. I also have Rights for Nature and the Leatherback Project handles are where we share more of our sea turtle specific work. You can find more information about our work on leatherbackproject.org or fornature.org as well. And if you're interested in learning more about the rights of nature more broadly, there's so many amazing books that you could start with. My favorite is The Rights of Nature, A Legal Revolution That Could Save the World by David Boyd. I think it's a great place to start if you haven't heard of it before.
I love that. We've got our calls to action. We've got our homework to do. We have our links
Yeah.
to go follow. So, yes, be sure to follow Callie's Instagram. She has the links to all of these different initiatives. And we've got a book suggestion too. I love that. Well, Callie, thank you so much. I know you're a very busy woman. You're doing a lot of amazing stuff. Congratulations on just submitting your PhD. I might be messing this up a little bit, but your PhD last night and still making time for us today. And I really hope, to have you back on the show in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun. And I hope to join you all again in the future. Thanks so much for caring about the rights of nature.
Of course, thank you for caring, and thank you to everyone who tunes in, who supports the show. As always, my goal is to bring you different world leaders, different ambitious people doing positive things for the planet. So, again, we'll link Callie's information in the bio to this podcast, and we will see you on the next episode of the Intelligence Report. Have a great rest of your day. Hey everyone, Dylan Welch here. Thank you for tuning into the Intelligence Report. Our goal is to bring you interesting people around the world, as well as a neutral geopolitical analysis on what's happening. Please subscribe to the podcast. Visit us for more long-form articles at www.intelligencereport.org and follow us along on social media for short-form daily content. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.